and also the session that was run by Brian Schmidt in the afternoon, which I know was used the Harvard IAT as a launching off point. So we'll be linking into both of those sessions yesterday. This session today is very gently paced, so you might find yourself getting a little bit anxious that it's not moving fast enough for you, so I just ask you just to stay with those feelings and just notice. It's also, as you can tell probably from the objects on the table, it's going to be quite a playful session and a playful way of investigating and exploring our minds. So it's a kind of gentle, playful way into looking at something that's quite serious and quite difficult to get at. As the session is an opportunity for you to observe your own minds and really inquire of yourselves, then there are some specific guidelines I would like to give you. So there are a couple of specific requests I would like to make of how you conduct yourself today. So the first thing is there are absolutely no right or wrong answers here. Okay, this is just about your experience. So all the diversity and variety of experience and responses you have, everything is valid and everything is welcome. Okay, so please, unlike in a lot of circumstances in life and academia, there's no one interpretation being sought here. Okay. I'd also ask you to listen generously. So keep your mind and heart open and listen generously to what people have to say. So if someone is sharing some experience that really you don't understand, ask yourself silently, what does he or she see that I do not? Okay, this is a very useful strategy, generally speaking, really to help us engage with different viewpoints and different experiences that may not equate with our own. Okay? So we're trying to keep minds and hearts as open as possible. Don't judge what comes up, just try and be as respectful and as open and listen generously. Okay? I trust phones are off for the duration. If you don't already know each other at your table, you are going to have an opportunity to introduce yourselves shortly. But first of all, I would like to introduce my two colleagues who are standing at the back of the room. Jessica Connor-Kennedy, waving. Jessica graduated as a scientist from the University of Melbourne in 2001 and has since studied education and management in her work as a learning professional and as a facilitator. So Jessica supports people working in fields such as education and justice so that they can be more effective and more personally satisfied in their work and enjoy greater well-being. So Jessica is a coach and runs short and long-term learning courses, and one of her major projects at the present involves implementing a strategy of mindfulness in a Victorian school. Okay, so that's a little bit about One Mind in the Mix in the room today. And Vicky Shukuroglu, standing next to Jessica. Vicky's a multidisciplinary artist, and she has, she's an educator as well, and she's got a great passion for activating dynamic and reflective learning spaces through art-based practice. So she uses art as a vehicle to enhance empathy, awareness, and innovation. And Vicky works extensively in school education and has done some wonderful projects in schools. A colleague described her as perhaps everything Vicky does reflects a cultural narrative about how we learn with and from each other. So Vicky's experience with working with people of diverse ages and backgrounds and experiences. So they won't be leading directly today, but they are on hand to attend to you throughout the session, and they'll be roving around, so please, if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to ask them. So I'm Natalie McDonough, and I'm leading the session this morning, and I'd just like to tell you a little bit about my background and how I've come to be doing the work I'm doing. So I actually began my professional life many years ago, actually in the 1980s, as a clothing designer in Europe. That phase ended in the mid-1990s in Australia, when one day I went to work in a company, BMW, and came home on the bus. And in the 15 years or so it took to get to the bus stop, I was fortunate enough to have many opportunities to work in different kinds of organisations and experience the kind of thinking that goes on. So one of the things I noticed was that irrespective of the sector or kind of organisation I was working in, so for instance in a bank whose staff uniform I was designing, in large-scale retail businesses where I was an in-house designer, small-scale manufacturing companies that I consulted to, and prestigious universities where I was invited to teach. I noticed that irrespective of sector or purpose, there was a certain way of seeing and thinking that prevailed. And it was remarkably similar, and also it was unquestioned, well, unrecognised and unquestioned. So to my mind, this seemed something like the fallacy in the fashion industry that one size fits all. When really the reality is that one size fits some on some occasions, in some circumstances. So there's a much more fluid and diverse ways of thinking needed, it seemed to me. I also personally am working in a university as a full-time lecturer, experienced the very constraining and detrimental effects that this one-size-fits-all seeing and thinking has on an organisation's culture, its performance and its adaptability and its creativity and innovation, and on the well-being of its people. And it was actually my experience while I was in a full-time academic role, experiencing overt sex discrimination, a female colleague and I, that actually catapulted me into setting up a practice, which I set up in 1999. And this was having enjoyed a very high caliber art and design education in the UK, where a diversity of mind was actively cultivated and celebrated, it seemed to me that the creative arts had much to offer organisations. So in 1999 I established a practice to experiment to see if I could design art-based thinking tools and experiential learning that would enable individuals and groups to look at, think about themselves, their projects and their organisation's culture in fresh and useful ways. So was it possible to bring the creative arts methods and principles and practices and create novel ways that could lead to insight and inventive action in organisations? Very quickly after I'd set up my practice, I enrolled in doctoral research to validate my thinking and the tools and processes and so on that were emerging from that practice. So I conducted my doctoral research across schools of management and art, so really trying to bring two traditions of knowledge and two approaches to organisational development and cultural change and so on together. So it's not either or, it was about expanding the repertoire. So through extensive design experiments and a collaboration with the Department of Primary Industries in Victoria, so this was predominantly working with environmental scientists, and that's where I met Jessica. This collaboration lasted 5 years, and what the research showed was that the methods and processes were, as well as being accessible to a general audience, their products and processes were able to generate very deep personal insight and transformation in the mind's ways of seeing and thinking, which then led to changing organisational culture. So since then, so over the last 15 years, it's been a great privilege to work both directly with organisations who are open enough to embrace something different, and also to support other practitioners to enhance the learning spaces they create and lead. Some of the work actually do with practitioners in CSIRO, and I know Dr. Megan Clark will be joining you later. When I relocated to Canberra in early 2012, I met visionary change agent Deborah May, who will be well known to Elizabeth Broderick and possibly some others of you in the room here. At Deborah's instigation, we paired our different and complementary practices, bringing together her expertise in gender, unconscious bias and organisational dynamics with my expertise in whole brain, whole mind learning. Okay. So by pairing our practices, we produced a unique methodology of philosophical inquiry and practical instruction, specifically to expand the leadership repertoire in organisations in order to create greater gender equity and more inclusive workplace culture. So the Treasury was the first organisation that was courageous enough to embrace our approach in early 2012 in addressing unrecognised bias that was impeding women's career progress into the senior executive levels. So the impacts and benefits were such that a rollout ensued, which is still going on, and Deborah is currently conducting a cultural audit to record the changes that have happened between 2011 and 2014 as a result of this work. So we, as word of mouth has spread, it's encouraged some other agencies to open themselves to taking this blended management and arts-based approach, and we're currently working with the senior leaders in the Department of Defence, and we are about to start work with the senior executive at Geoscience Australia. So just gives you a sense of some of the things that are going on. So today's session is going to be a brief taste, if you like, of the theory and the experiences that are incorporated into this blended model that Deborah May and I have produced to work specifically with organisations around creating greater gender equity and greater inclusive workplace culture. Okay. So, I'm sure you know this, but I don't think it does any harm to be reminded, is that diversity alone is not a guarantee of inclusive workplace culture. So diversity needs to go hand in hand with inclusion. So it's possible to have diverse demographics of people in an organisation without them actually being able to participate fully and make a full contribution. So the two things do need to work hand in hand. And the greatest predictor, the literature shows, of how inclusive an organisation's culture is the quality of relationships that managers have with their direct reports. So that's a much better indicator of how inclusive general culture is, looking at that rather than what is the kind of gender, ethnic, demographic mix of people in an organisation. So I'm using inclusion as this is borrowed from a report from Deloitte, working with the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, that inclusion is an active process of change or integration as well as an outcome. And really it's a sense of belonging. And the elements required for inclusion are fairness and respect, and feeling valued and having a sense of belonging, so where we feel valued for who we are, what we do and how we contribute. Now, just bear that in mind about the sense of belonging, because as we move into talking about the brain-mind system, how we generate inclusion relies very heavily on certain traits of our brain and the way our mind works. So I'm just going to talk briefly about whole brain, holistic mind is the term I use, and relate it to you, or put it to you as the premise and the source of inclusive culture. So culture is a construct and product of the human mind that we are constantly producing. So every exchange we have with somebody is perpetuating that culture. If we're open and gracious and accommodating, then that is producing, that's affecting the culture. If we're closed, judgmental, fixed in our views, that's creating the culture. So this is the good news and the bad news all wrapped up together. So the good news is that culture can be influenced moment by moment by our decisions and our choices and how we respond and behave. And the bad news is that it responds to our moment-by-moment choices. So it's not a one-off event, creating a model for inclusive culture. This is a moment-by-moment proposition for each of us in every exchange we have. Okay. So what we do or what we don't do, how we behave, what actions we take, what decisions we make, all arise from our minds. So what we notice, the ways we think, how we interpret what we see. So the character and norms of organisational culture reflect the character and norms of minds. So not just present minds, but past minds. So obviously culture grows up over time from minds that have come before us, and when we participate in an organisation, we respond to that culture, and it shapes our way of thinking as well as us shaping the culture itself. So it's a dynamic exchange. I'm now going to talk to you very briefly, and it's a massive simplification, of course, just a little bit about some key characteristics of the human brain, and why this should be of interest to us in creating more diverse and inclusive workplace culture. So the great reference for this is a work by Ian McGilchrist. Some of you already may know, unfashionably large, dense book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. I know that you're all very practiced readers, so I'm sure you'll be up to the task, and if you're interested, it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's taken him 20 years to put this work together. Anyway, doing a great disservice to his work, but I just want to draw out some key characteristics between the right and left hemisphere of the brain. So it used to be thought the functions of the brain were permanently sited in one hemisphere or the other. For example, that the left hemisphere controls reason and the right hemisphere controls emotion. Well, we know that that's not the case. So we know now that the brain's left and right hemispheres are profoundly involved in both. We know both hemispheres are profoundly involved in reason, in imagination, in creativity. Visual imagery is not only in the right hemisphere, much of it is in the left, and both hemispheres work in language, although the left hemisphere, by and large, controls speech. So although the right hemisphere works in language, metaphor, symbolism, poetry, other kinds of more metaphorical and symbolic language, it's not vocal on its own behalf. So, and the other important thing to be aware of is that the two hemispheres, although they are, of course, working together all the time, they do yield distinctly different worlds to us, with quite strong implications for creating an inclusive workplace culture. So the left hemisphere yields a mechanical, static, separated world. This is the world of either-or. So it deals in parts. It deals in abstract models and concepts, not reality. So this is the map, not the actual terrain. Okay. So, for example, if you're fighting a battle intimate knowledge of all the plant species that grow in the field of battle are no use to you. What you need is information about where certain things are that you need to know about, and so the map becomes much more important and useful in that context. So it's not reality, but it does work better in that circumstance. So the left hemisphere yields clarity and power to manipulate things that are known. It yields a world of the fixed, static, isolated, decontextualized, literal, explicit, general in nature, and ultimately lifeless. Okay? So this is abstract. It's an abstract world. It's not reality. The left hemisphere also is dominates in separating and categorizing the world and makes generalized mental models from those categories. So seeing people as groups, not as unique individuals. So here you can start to see where our propensity for stereotyping comes in, and some of the implicit associations we have arise from this idea that we categorize all people through some means or other. So all men wearing pink shirts become associated with certain traits of the first man with a pink shirt that I've encountered, and I can make generalizations on that without seeing these people as individuals. So the left hemisphere also pays attention in a very particular way. It gives very narrow, steady, sharply focused attention to what it already knows is important. It doesn't, and what it does is it seeks to fit that into pre-existing abstract models or general categories. So if we meet somebody or they have an idea or view that doesn't automatically fit into our preordained model, then the left hemisphere is very ably just ignores it. If it doesn't fit, it's not open to accommodating or accepting. Okay. So you can see again that if we're living, if we're operating in a way that's very dominated by the left hemisphere, we're not going to be open to views that challenge our preordained models. Does anyone watch TV? Anyone watch programs such as Big Bang Theory? Okay. The Tunnel, Doc Martin? Okay. So, so TV characters, as a way of kind of getting a generalized kind of portrayal of people living in a way that is very dominated by the brain's left hemisphere, are characters such as Sheldon Cooper, Doc Martin himself, in The Killing and The Tunnel, the two female detectives, so these are characters that we know, if you've seen them, that find it difficult to kind of empathise and relate to the social cues and codes of what's going on with other people. So the right hemisphere, by contrast, pays attention in a very different way. It pays attention very broadly in an open, vigilant way. So it gives sustained attention and alertness for what might be just present without any commitment to what it actually is. So it's the part of our brain that pays attention to the periphery, it's attuned to novelty, it's highly linked with innovation and seeing difference. So it doesn't judge and it doesn't try to fit things into a pre-existing model. So it's always on the lookout for things that might be different from our expectations. And also, by contrast, the right hemisphere yields to us a world that is embodied. So it's very much about a felt, physical experience. So it's an embodied, interconnected, living world. And it deals very much in individuals. It's the hemisphere of the brain that dominates in us being able to recognise people we know, faces we know, and people we have seen before. It's also very dominant being able to sense cues from people about whether they're feeling uncomfortable, whether they're feeling included. It's the part of the brain that pays attention to body language, whether people are open. Oops, sorry. It also sees things in ever shifting. It's not fixed, and everything is interconnected. So it understands implicit meaning, metaphor, body language, emotional expressions in the face. And because it deals with felt experience, the right hemisphere is one that dominates in us feeling a sense of belonging. Okay. So this is becoming important to us in the more inclusive mind.
Yes.
It's also heavily dominates in empathy and our ability to step into someone else's shoes and relate to their experience. Now, what is slightly strange news to me is that, and slightly alarming depending on my mood of the day, is that our Western world is becoming ever more dominated by the left hemisphere of the brain. So we are moving more and more into this kind of a more fixed, static, mechanical worldview at the expense of the more interconnected, embodied view. So, I'm now going to move on to the mind. We're going to skip very conveniently over the link between the brain and mind. Obviously, they're not the same thing, but we do know the mind emerges from the brain and other systems in the body. But what I'm using the term mind here to describe that sense we have of a self, an I, with an identity that's able to think and feel and choose and act. So mind as an entity that gives us agency in the world to create or nurture or act from kindness or act from cruelty. So that's what I mean by mind. It's obviously not limited to the brain, and the brain does a whole range of other things, of course. How many people did IAT tests before they came? Okay, so I know that you had an opportunity to, in Brian Schmidt's session yesterday, to explore some of those, some scenarios and associations and so on. But you can begin to see here that in this left hemisphere world that's yielded to us, that these associations we have come from our categorization of people based on certain traits. If anyone's more interested, the book, The Blind Spots, written by two of the co-creators of the IAT test, and one of the things that struck me from their work was this, that whatever the results in your IAT, and I know they're all private and you weren't asked to disclose those in any way, but what these automatic preferences show is they don't necessarily lead to overt discrimination. So there's no direct link between, because, you know, you've got this implicit association with men and science and career. That doesn't mean that you are overtly discriminating or behaving in a discriminatory way. What it does overwhelmingly predict, though, is that we do treat people differently. So it's going to be more subtle in terms of, say, how friendly we are towards people. So if we have a negative association with certain groups of people based on certain traits, then we are likely to treat them less friendly, be less friendly, less warm, less welcoming. So again, this links back to this kind of sense of belonging and inclusion. So also, being aware of these things doesn't automatically lead to us taking any action. It's perfectly possible for us. There's a rather nice video available on YouTube about a very brave young man in London who goes onto the street wearing a sandwich board with very abusive language, abusing the homeless on his sandwich board, and handing out pamphlets about, you know, how the homeless are a waste of space and should be got rid of and they're a burden on society. So he attracts a storm of attention. I mean, people you know, verbally abuse him, they merely physically attacking him, and so on. So people are very worked up about this. When the same very brave young man appears with the same sandwich bowl where it says, "Help the homeless," everyone ignores him. They just walk past him. So he's waving it in, "Please help the homeless," and so on. You know, he can get one taker. So this, in terms of the IoT co-creators, this is that we can have these reflective associations where, of course, these are our values, and yes, we think it's very important. We should help the homeless and equally do nothing about it. So these two things, we hold these contradictory positions. So just because we're aware of it doesn't mean to say we're going to take action. We do need to be purposeful in taking action. So, modelling, so how do we do this? So in my worldview, this is about becoming much more helping the mind become much more aware of itself, okay? So the more the mind can become spacious and accepting and accommodating and adaptive, the more other minds we meet are going to respond in kind, and this is the source of inclusive workplace culture, okay? So what I mean here, though, is that this is the mind that can accept and accommodate. We don't have to agree. Okay, it's just allowing the mind to become more spacious, to accommodate, accept, and allow different views and ideas to coexist, rather than holding a fixed set of ideas to be applied to every situation. So this goes back to my kind of idea of this is not one size fits all. This is one size fits some of the time on some occasions. So in fact, we need, you know, a much broader kind of mental wardrobe, colours, shapes, lengths, weights, what have you. Okay, you'll be relieved, that's enough talk at. So, how can we develop this more spacious mind? And that is the source of more inclusive workplace culture. One of the most effective ways is through mindfulness training. Anyone already have a mindfulness practice or some kind of meditation practice? Yes, a couple of people. Regular practitioners? Yes? Okay. So this will be familiar to you, and for those of you that this is not familiar to, mindfulness is an ongoing attention. So this is a capacity we can learn to pay ongoing attention to our internal states and our awareness of how our mind and body are responding to whatever context we're in. So this is not just the cognitive stuff of formulating responses, arguing, debating. This is a parallel process running alongside where we're able to notice, oh, really, I shouldn't have eaten that last night. Why did I have that last, you know, glass of red wine? And noticing that your attention has wandered off. Just noticing you're getting irritated at someone whose opinions you disagree with. So, and this is recognizing the movements of the mind and being able to respond accordingly. Okay. So, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a mindfulness practice now. And this is really the, you might think of this as connecting with the mind before the conditioned mind. So all of the things that I know you would have heard in Cordelia's talk yesterday. So this is mind before it becomes male mind, female mind, before us and them, before you and me. So this is mind where we are all made of stars. Okay? So this is mind beyond categories. And I'm going to teach you a practice now that you can, I'd encourage you to bring into your regular work life. Just a few minutes each day can make a massive difference. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to please sit with your feet flat on the floor and leaning back into your chair. So make sure your back is straight but not rigid. So really allow the chair to support you So feet flat on the floor, no crossed ankles, no crossed knees. And hands resting gently either in the lap or on the thighs or on the knees. If your hands are resting in each other, then have your non-dominant hand be the cup and allow your dominant hand to rest inside that. Okay. When you're ready, close your eyes. Okay. So now try and bring all parts of your mind into your body. So these are all parts of your mind that are not currently here, that are still in the conversation last night, are somewhere in your email inbox, are somewhere on the plane tonight, somewhere in the weekend's activities. Bring all of those parts of the mind into the room and into your body. Try and bring your full attention to the breath. Just try and begin to become much more aware of the sensation of air passing in and out of the body. When your mind's attention wanders off to something that's happening next week, just gently bring your attention back to the breath. So stay focused on the breath. Just become more aware of the gentle rise and fall of the ribs, the gentle expansion and contraction of your lungs as you inhale and as you exhale. When your mind wanders off again, just gently bring that part back to the room and to the breath. And now focusing on your breath, just notice at the end, just breathing naturally, just notice at the end of the out breath, just before the next in breath, there's a tiny pause. This is the space of mind before made mind. So this is the space of mind made of stars. Not male mind, not female mind, not science mind, not artist mind, just mind. Just keep breathing naturally and have your attention just alight on that point at the end of the out-breath. Just rest, bring your attention gently as a butterfly onto a leaf. Just allow your mind to open into that space. Allow that space to open into your mind. Just keep your attention coming back to the breath and focused on that tiny break between the out-breath and the in-breath. Just keep allowing your mind to open into this unconditioned, unfettered space. Space where everything coexists. And still attending to the breath, I'm going to ask you privately to yourself to express gratitude for all the minds in the room and the wealth of experience that is available to you today. And again, privately to yourself, but now ask you make a commitment to share generously of your own mind and your own experience for the collective benefit of all the minds in the room. When you feel ready, very gently, very slowly, open your eyes and expand your sphere of attention to incorporate the people sitting closest to you, and then everyone at your table, and then everyone in the room. Anyone on the nod? One of the things that when if you begin a more regular mindfulness practice, you may find that the first thing you get in touch with is your exhaustion. So I would say don't be alarmed and don't be put off by that. It's a bit paradoxical that, in fact, by doing this kind of mindfulness practice and connecting with that, what arises is actually becomes a great way of holding it more lightly and being able to continue without pushing ourselves, without really driving. You know, it enables us to rest in that, honour the exhaustion, and continue to be productive. Aside from the connections, our purpose here about a more inclusive mind that's able to embrace diversity and generate a sense of belonging with others, mindfulness practice, as those of you who already are practitioners, also has extraordinary physiological benefits. So reduced blood pressure, heart rate, increased sense of well-being, reduced cortisol in the brain, which is, you know, the chemical associated with anxiety. So a lot of very good reasons to just do some very simple mindfulness practices like this, a few minutes a day. All right, enough words, now objects. So Picasso said that the most commonplace object was a vehicle, a vessel for his thoughts. And what I'm going to invite you to do now is to engage different parts of the brain-mind system and do some thinking through the objects that are on the table in front of you. Now, the main purpose, the activity is a device. The main purpose of the activity is an opportunity for you to try and observe in real time how your mind is responding and working, okay? So metacognitive observation as well as doing the activity, okay? So what I'm going to invite you to do, just for a way of introducing yourselves at the table, is to, and this, working with the objects is actually an activity in 3 parts. We're going to do the first part now, and then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to do second 2 parts so they accumulate. So the first part is a kind of playful way of revealing preferences of the mind. So what I'm going to ask each person at each table to do is to survey the objects that are there, and I'm going to ask you each to choose 2 objects. One that your mind immediately relates to, and one that your mind does not relate to. So it could be something you find ugly, pointless, disturbing. Now, don't just go with the things that are closest. Feel free to stand up and choose from the whole collection. So each person, 2 objects each. If someone chooses the object you want, then you're welcome to share the object. the objects at your tables. At your tables, just take it in turns to go around. Introduce yourselves by name if you're not known to each other, and just say something very briefly about the object your mind relates to and the object your mind does not relate to. So just a brief, share briefly with your colleagues at the table on why your mind relates to one object and why it doesn't relate to the other. Okay. So just a couple more minutes on this. Apologies if not everyone has been able to share the two objects. What I'd like to do now is to find out if there are one or two people in the room who'd be willing to share with the whole group, with a roving mic, the two objects they chose and why they might relate to one and not to the other. There's someone with their hand up at the back, Vicky. Thank you. So if you'd be good enough to stand up, and if you can juggle objects and microphone. Yep.
So the first object that I did relate to is actually the really old head. Everyone thinks I'm a bit odd at the time, but it actually reminds me of my childhood, where I had a lot of dolls. Who knows where else Yellowstone is from. And my cousin came over because she was doing her hairdressing. She cut the hair off all my dolls. And then proceeded to try and swap the heads around. And so I just really relate to it. It reminds me of that experience. It was a difficult childhood. The other object I feel a bit embarrassed to say, but share it, is this one, the plain envelope. I picked it up. I don't know what's in it. I don't relate to it. But then I opened it, and then it seemed like a letter to someone, and so I couldn't read it, so I had to put it back in. I actually haven't read it, but it says DU, right? And from Alice at the back. So apologies if I've invaded anyone's privacy, but that's.
Okay, thanks. Did anyone else choose the envelope? No? Yes, you chose the envelope? No, there some groups have got the same identical envelope. I just wondered if anyone else had chosen that. But, okay. So, would you be good enough to share the two objects you? Yes.
Okay. So I'm making, and so I chose the empty black box because I don't think that it wasn't interesting. And I opened it up. What's inside? Cute little bill. That's an hour. Quite complex and something interesting. And I don't know, choosing something I didn't relate to, but this is the most
The battery. Did anyone else choose the Energizer battery or one of the batteries? More than one person? Anyone choose the battery? Okay. Did you choose that as something your mind related to or didn't relate to? Didn't relate to. Okay. Anyone choose a battery because their mind related to it? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Could you say why your mind related to the battery?
Because they're at first reaction to the
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else willing to share? Thank you. Great.
So I actually relate to the seed pod because they're all over my backyard. And the dogs often bring them in the house. So that's why I relate to that. And I do not relate to the pink butterfly converse because I think it's a beautiful one. And I'm not particularly keen on color pink. So that's why I chose to not relate to them.
Thank you. Anyone else choose the seed pod? Who chose the seed pod because they related to it? Okay. Anyone choose the seed pod because they didn't relate to it? Okay. So as I said, this is a kind of playful way to reveal, preferences. So we relate to some things. Our mind relates to some things for a whole range of reasons. Life experience, childhood memories, could be colour, functionality, what have you, and we don't relate to things, again, because of negative associations or positive associations and so on. So our mind is full of these associations we make. So as you know, if you did the IAT, that's a very kind of instrumental way at getting at some of these things, and this is a more kind of playful way of revealing some of those things, but also allowing us to have a different kind of conversation with each other. So does anyone have any observations of their own mind or the dynamic in the group through thinking through the objects? Thank you.
So, I really like it.
encapsulation. So spiritual ways in Australia. And it's just interesting that, sort of one thing being so many.
Yeah, yeah. Did you feel compelled to I've done it again, I'm sorry. Did you feel compelled in any way to talk Elaine out of her view?
Oh,
no. So this is a demonstration really of this idea of the diverse and divergent interpretations of the same thing can coexist comfortably. So in this state of mind, I put to you that that is an inclusive mind. You know, it's spacious, can accommodate these things. It doesn't need to gravitate, or doesn't need to kind of, try and, your mind didn't need to pull Elaine's mind to your view and your interpretation. So, any other observations people had? Thank you.
We have this creepy baby, really creepy, and it was my object of not relating to for many reasons. But just because it's creepy, and we have a discussion, and we all thought it was creepy, and couldn't work out why it was creepy. Kind of just everybody agreed. I think there was one person that didn't find it a bit revolting, disgusting. I'm just going to put it back under my nicely. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody else is maybe, but it's kind of funny that we couldn't work out why we didn't like it, really.
So far in the history of that object, nobody is related to it. Everyone's found it creepy. So it's kind of it's interesting to me, because that little thing's very old, and she or he has been wheeled out on many occasions, and very unloved for objects. But again, it's just a demonstration around some things, like our minds can gather in some kind of, consensus without having to work for it. And other times the mind can be quite divergent. So.
Just a comment about the thought process of choosing. I found myself realising that I was sort of metagaming it before it started, and I wondered whether everybody else did the same thing. So we sat down, and there were things, and we started speaking, and I thought, I'm going to have to choose one. Okay, so which one am I going to choose, and what reason am I going to give? Am I right in guessing that I'm not the only one in this?
Yeah, so there's some. Do we have another microphone? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I chose this one as like the thing I couldn't relate to, and a lot of people chose things that they couldn't relate to. And it occurred to me that by the process of trying to choose the thing that you can't relate to, you're relating to the thing. And also, as other people get I had proof like it is says and then someone said, oh, it's an upside down exclamation mark. And suddenly it's got a discussion with it, and interaction with it, so now I can relate to it.
Yes, then, of course we are relating to it, and we'll move more on to that. But usually, kind of in the busyness and in everyday things, then the mind is much more categorical. The left hemisphere, when it's kind of leading the way, is much more categorical. Yes, no, relate to, don't relate to, and kind of moving forward. So, any other comments, thoughts?
I was just going to say, I didn't realize that we were going to speak, and the whole time we were speaking, I'm like, so.
What, you didn't want to play with them?
No, I did.
Oh, okay.
I was really distracted. Yeah, it's really cool having things on the table and kind of putting them together. And so, yeah, we were all kind of thinking about it.
We've got time for one more, and then I'll let you have your tea.
So I said that I think Vegas is photographic.
That was a brief one, so perhaps we can have one done.
On that table, I noticed that the things people did not relate to, they seemed to break into two categories. Either they didn't know what it was, or they didn't like it. That's kind of interesting. Whereas the things they did relate to, There's a really wide range of leads and it's widely related to that.
Did anyone have any observation of the kind of feel of the dynamic in the group? Thank you.
I found it really interesting in our group, at least, that there was no conflict of guidance. It wasn't like everybody went for the same one. You started thinking, I like this one, everybody likes this one. And everybody wants something very different, right? Whereas the other place we did have a conflict, one person went for the same answer and different care with the road now. And I thought that was very different for expected. Like everybody was writing each other the same thing. And everybody probably thought the same thing, something different.
Yes.
And so there's no conflict, everybody wants something different.
Yeah. So again, you know, this is a kind of playful way of, you know, revealing some of these things actually about that differences and divergences and multiple different interpretations. And again, just to go back to the point, what I would suggest to you is what you've experienced there is, you know, an inclusive space where all your minds have been able to open to accommodate, you know, divergent range of different objects, and you could say that these objects, you know, stand in for people's ideas or opinions or experiences or what have you. So, you know, your minds have open to meet and accommodate, and even where your views have differed enormously around one particular object, that those divergent views can coexist. So this is obviously it's an artificial device, but it's a way of getting to allowing the mind to really kind of look at itself and start to consider some of its modes and what it feels like when the mind is operating in an inclusive, open and spacious way. So one more.
Just something that struck me there, it would be very different exercise if we were given a particular viewpoint to discuss, or a thought of an idea, or a concept. So this provides a safe space for people to actually listen and to want to know. And you don't have that very fixed thing framed in your mind. It's a really nice contrast in terms of the discussion, and then discuss ideas or responses to things.
Which is why merging some of this way of thinking has worked incredibly well in the programs that Deborah May and I have been running, say with the Treasury or Department of Defence, that we can get at, you know, potentially quite confronting and difficult things about the mind in a subtle way that opens up the conversation, that people can then kind of explore things in more depth, you know, and relate to them. Well, what are the implications of this for me as a leader, or how I manage my meetings and what have you. So, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss that later. So we running a little bit late now, so we'll break for morning tea, and perhaps we could reconvene in say 20 minutes. I know there's would that be okay? Yes. A little slightly shorter break. And would you like to give instructions about the photograph?
Yes, before you all go for tea and cakes, I'm sorry, we're going to have a group picture. So, can you all follow Ruth? She's going to take us outside and arrange the group.